understand what it means to be in the same way.
Okay, we're going to start again now, so welcome back. In this second part of the evening, we're going to be having a broader discussion about the role of arts in being able to help people address and to engage with human rights issues. To kick us off, Maria's got a few points she'd like to raise with us.
Yeah, so I do have here a few notes, but I'm also aware of time, so I'm just going to highlight a few things that I would like to share with you and then hear what you might think about these. I think one of the things the film does and asks us to think about is why there is not a publicly visible outcry about these issues. Why is that are people failing to engage? I know for us in this room and people who tend to attend events like this, we all care, we are all very engaged. But why is not the general public engaged with these issues? Why are people failing to publicly show their indignation? So I think this is a very important question. And another thing I would like to say, which I think is very striking, there is certainly not a lack of solidarity initiatives. There are many advocacy groups and grassroots initiatives, from the Refugee Council to the Migration Rights Network. The social movement City of Sanctuary, which Colleen is part, is very vibrant and has made British cities more welcoming. We've got theatres of sanctuary, universities of sanctuary. However, these initiatives, they really do not make the headlines. They do not really attract wide public attention. So what I think we've got, and I think I said this as a bit of a provocation, I think it's important that we reflect about this. We've got like two big bubbles. On the one hand, we've got mostly educated, middle-class people who are well informed about the abuses of the asylum system, who are keen to be and easy to be motivated. And on the other hand, we've got vast sectors of the British society across all social strata who are very fearful of asylum seekers and refugees that they see as a threat to the nation, to their jobs and their security. And there's a very, very strong narrative and discourse around the figure of the bogus asylum seeker since the 1990s, which has pervaded the British press, not only the tabloids, but also the mainstream press. And that's the kind of narrative that the general public, who is not committed and interested in many of these issues, is getting. That's how they engage with asylum issues. So what I would like to say is that if there is something that needs to be done, and also from my own research with artists with a migrant and refugee background, is to fight the stigmatization and to engage with these people at local level. And I think Isabel's work is certainly doing that, and she can talk a little bit more about that. I think there's also the work of Platform Arts, the Arts and Refugees Network, and also more recently an exhibition by the Tate Gallery where selected artists engage with issues of migration and asylum. And I think artists have a role to play in fighting stigma. I just wanted to talk a little bit about this notion of stigma. So I think the red doors are about activating stigma. And I've got here a quote by the sociologist Imogen Tyler. She has written very compellingly about stigma. She argues this: the activation of stigma is central to the proliferation of fears about border controls and terror threats, economic insecurity, and labor precariousness. In such a climate, public anxieties and hostilities are channeled towards those groups within the population, such as the unemployed, homeless people, welfare recipients, irregular migrants, and disabled people, who are imagined to be a parasitical drain upon scarce resources. So I think this is the context in which we are now. So how is it we make people engage? I interviewed more than 20 artists, and I'm planning to interview a few more. And they all spoke about the need to say the need to engage and to tell with their artwork and their practices real stories of migration and asylum. And they all spoke in some way or another about the need to counter the narratives that we find in the media. I've got here a quote by an artist based in Leeds, and she said something very interesting. She says what she wants is not that people engage with, what the narratives that are in the media, which are all about statistics and about numbers. She wants people to be moved to go and find their own story. Go and find your own story. Go and find that story for yourself. And while I find this very compelling, I also think that what is that people do it when they find their stories? What is that they do with these stories of migration and asylum that they find when they engage with the arts? What is that they can do? So I think this is very difficult. I don't have an answer, but I think we need to ask how we make these stories politically relevant. And by politically relevant, I do not mean everyone has to become an activist, although that is not a bad idea. But we need to find ways, spaces to connect with people and to make these stories that people find relevant. And I think the answer to that is really about the work that artists, and not only artists, each of us here, and mobilizing other people can do at community level to help bridge the tensions and divisions that exist in communities. Something that was very visible in the film was that the Red Doors were creating divisions in the community. People in poverty who were on benefits were thinking, like one of the interviewees was saying, oh, you know, if you go and say to someone who's already in poverty, asylum seekers are here to rob your benefits, that's a very strong narrative that is going to have an effect. So I think we need to heal these issues and to bridge these tensions in communities and work at community level. The foundation, the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation, has done recently a report on the civic role of arts organizations. And they said something that I find very striking and was also striking for them. One striking aspect at our first consultation discussion was the level of skepticism about the ability of conventional politics to make a positive difference, and the strong belief in people-powered local action. So my question to you is whether is this too optimistic, or is it the way forward? So is that what we need to do something at local community level that can help us engage with migration and asylum issues and talk about these issues in a different way? So I think that that's the way forward. That's my own view, but I would like to hear any other views about these.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that a hand up?
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
good.
I can completely agree with you. I've spent nearly exactly 2 years now, back and forth to Greece, working in camps in Greece. And one of the things I did when I came back was being so sort of, not disturbed isn't the right, but just so driven when you come back to, people just don't know this is happening. People don't know it's happening. And I almost felt like my generation is a bit lost. We've got to go younger. And where can you find lots of young people? So I did some presentations to do in schools and to engage. So I had different ones for primary and then secondary school. And yeah, and I think I've not done it for a while. I just haven't had time, so need to get back to that. But you know, and the schools were very welcoming and the kids were amazing. And you know, asking questions like, "Well, can't I send my pillow over there?" And I've got a teddy. Can I send that there? And for the younger ones, and then the older ones, very searching questions about immigration and things like that. So yeah, I completely agree, and we need to. I suppose what I felt was it was my duty to not just think, oh, I've done my bit. I've never felt like I've done my bit, because it's never ever, we were talking about this, it's never ever ending. And my last trip I've just back from Chios, and it's worse than when I started 2 years ago. And you just think, part of you just wants to think, oh, I'm just going to switch off and it's too much, so I'm not getting anywhere. And then you get a message from somebody that you've met 2 years ago, you know, on the Macedonian border or something, saying you really helped during that time, you helped me get through that, and I think, okay, well, that one person that helped, so I'll keep going. But yeah, I agree, it's got to be on local level, and if we can get the kids activated and the young people, the teenagers, I think that's a great start, because they can talk to their parents, and that's what I kind of thought hoped would happen. I don't know.
Thank you. At the back.
I've been listening and from my work and personal experience, reflecting on many of the things that have been coming up today, and I think there are some underlying mechanisms which are particularly strong, I feel, in the UK, and especially in more recent years, but in time, which I think when the observation has been like, there are all these kinds of initiatives, but somehow we are not moving anywhere. And the three things that for me come to mind, which is much wider to address in all kinds of ways what people can do, is the first thing is that people get much better understanding what the mechanism of othering is. And we othering, and we other all the time to many people. And I think what we see happening with asylum seekers and is kind of the extreme forms. And the second thing is, I think the UK has a huge tradition of charities, and that there is something very positive about it, but it also means that there is a mechanism where society takes sometimes decisions who are the deserving and the non-deserving. And so to much more speak and think about the difficulties of what I call the horror of benevolence. And I think that has a huge, strong background within the whole empire mentality, and I think it's a mentality that is still around, and it's so difficult to speak about that or to think through it because most of it is so positive. But there is an underlying horror, I would say. I actually tried at the Foundling Museum to propose, I'm a curator, to propose to do something around that. So it's the othering, it's the benevolence idea, and it's also the which I feel is incredible. I don't get the words. Seeps through entire society, is stronger in the UK than I have experienced. We've lived in quite a lot of countries in Europe and outside, but it's acceptance of inequality. And I think, and that goes from I'm trying within my work, and we were just speaking about how can it much stronger try to allow people, or to there where we lump people together as the whatever we call idea, that's a varied group of people with and at the same time how can we much more allow people to experience sameness, shared experience, whatever, across boundaries where people don't think it's there. This is my main principle that I use for 10 years working for Leicester City Council here, and I can tell you it is very difficult. I'm the curator of world arts here, and I only have had one exhibition where I felt I was allowed to actively do these things. And it's so it's just an observation that I wanted to bring, and it's even like if we speak with children and children say, "Oh, I would like to give my teddy," how in a way it's great, and we see in the boxes we make, but at the same time we also teach them almost to separate. It is
but
something
I think
very...
how else do you, I mean my whole thing would be...
Let the point be finished being made and then
Okay.
come
Yeah,
back.
yeah. It's for me, and why it's so difficult if we do things out of the best of our heart. How, for me, that is where the sometimes kind of starting point with all young people, with anybody I work with. So it's and where which partly I very liked in the film, to And where I hear that the city centre saying we don't work for people but with people. But I think these are very difficult mechanism. And the last one where I would say every school should do things, and every university student and anybody who works for whatever organization, just to have the basic understandings about unconscious biases, and that we should that is how we are wired. Everybody is biased. Full stop.
Okay.
So yeah,
That's
just
right.
some
That's
observations and also
Yeah.
some.
Please.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that I've always gone when I've gone to talk. It's always been obviously changing people's names,
Yeah.
but always about individuals. So
Yeah.
individual stories. So exactly like you were saying. So picking up stories from people that I've met across Greece, usually changing the names, but then putting it to age appropriate.
Yeah.
For the children to then think about, as that could be their mum, that could be their sister, that could be their dad, that sort of thing, and I think it's worked, and I think it has made them think, and I mean especially the younger ones, they just literally cannot understand it. Why can't they come here? Why can't they? Why doesn't somebody give them a house? Why are they in a tent? You know, it's kind of quite mind blowing for them. But yeah.
Can I just come in? I totally understand the point that you were making in terms of the horror of benevolence, because that, to some extent in general terms, I feel the same way. It can kind of reinforce those hierarchies of, look at me, I'm so good and I'm helping them, and reinforces the hierarchy of the victim that needs help and has got no agency. At the same time, we need to carry on doing this work.
Yeah,
so it's not... Charity is about being in solidarity, but what does it mean to be in solidarity if you don't empathize with the other person? So actually I wanted to bring a range of voices in regards to this film, a range of voices of different people from different countries and different ages with different experiences. And I deliberately chose to work with some of them that actually they are criminals, to actually ask this question. Who deserves the empathy? Can we be have solidarity towards this group of people? That they committed crimes, and so what? At a human level, don't they deserve solidarity? Or is it just the professional asylum-seeking person with a family that's law-abiding, that only those people deserve solidarity? So it's to pose all of those questions. Sorry, I just wanted to make this comment because I think it's important, usually, especially in the media, when we get portrayed of the asylum seeker, in order to draw empathy, it's always the family or the child, the innocent, that we can empathize with, because we want to think that all of us are good, isn't it? But, so what about these people?
Yes. Yeah. Although I want to place a slightly different challenge, because we talk about the stigmatising, we talk about the othering, we talk about the benevolence, as though they all happen unconsciously. But isn't it a case that those things are actually deliberately driven by political actors?
Oh yeah. I was going to bring that point in, because all of these mechanisms are what those in power need to do to keep society divided. And the narrative of you taking our benefit, somebody who's on benefit will be frightened by that. There are I won't go down that road because but we are faced with, since the change of government in 2010, we've been faced with the narrative of austerity and the necessity of austerity, and everything that despite obviously all the problems of the previous government, they did raise many people out of poverty, and also and children, and achieved, you know, quite a lot in terms of housing and education, public buildings, the Skills for Life strategy, etc., etc. And all of that has been wiped away just in the last 7 years. We now have quite scary rises in child poverty. We've got food banks, all the rest of it, which we didn't have before. Homelessness is very visible on our streets. And I think one way forward is connecting this particular vulnerable group of asylum seekers who have not yet got their papers and who are subject to so much abuse and institutionalised destitution and detention, etc., with others in society who are suffering under austerity, and recognising that actually they have the same battle and it's the same advocacy in terms of human rights. Othering isn't just happening to migrants or asylum seekers, it's happening to people on benefit, it's happening to people with disabilities. You know, these are the scroungers. That you've heard all of that narrative, you know, and it was quite so easy, that political discourse that we're hearing, where people are not being referred to as people. So when Cameron talked about swarms of, you know, migrants invading Europe, he wasn't alluding to people at all, and that kind of language, you know, and the language of, you know, this, all of that needs challenging, and it needs challenging at every level. So, you know, education and all the rest of it, and people to understand that. But I think there is something important about bringing that, connecting people together, and actually widening campaigns. So there's a debate in the refugee sector, because some refugee organisations say we shouldn't have detention of asylum seekers and refugees, but they don't really care about the other migrants. Well, you know, this is a human rights issue, and it's got to be wider than that. One of the things that, the reasons why City of Sanctuary work across sort of schools and universities, etc., these are mainstream places where non-mainstream issues can be raised. What we want is for it to be a mainstream moral imperative that we protect those who are vulnerable in society, that we are able to provide sanctuary for everybody. And one of the activities that many of our groups engage with are connecting people, and they use food, they use music, they use all sorts of strategies. So I'd like to give you an example from our group in Swindon, where they use a pop-up restaurant, and they invite loads of people, including the UKIP councillor, to come and eat Nigerian food or Syrian food, and they have an asylum seeker bake the food. They have a local restaurant that provides them with the equipment and the space to cook that food, and then they have this big feast, and every other person is an asylum seeker. So the UKIP councillor, for example, finds himself chatting to 2 asylum seekers in the course of his delicious dinner, and by the end of it, a lot of barriers have been broken down. And the local restaurant now has sanctuary tapas on their menu, and it's a different tapas every week from a different country, and what they're doing is they're taking recipes from local asylum seekers. And it's a very famous restaurant, and they have lots of people passing by. It's the best restaurant in the region, and so people say, what is this sanctuary tapas? And they have that conversation. The more of these conversations, the better.
That's really good.
But I think on advocacy, you know, inevitably people become politicised when they connect and make friends. And they think, oh, my mate's in prison, but they shouldn't be there. I do know many people who, I've actually seen people cry at awareness raising sessions saying, I didn't know we did that in our country. Our detention centres, we have the largest detention estate in Europe up until very recently when Hungary overtook us. And we're the only country in Europe that detain asylum seekers indefinitely. Most people aren't aware of that at all. They are hidden. So the awareness raising is really important to make this obvious, but it's also important to connect that, you know, with the othering of those on benefit, and that it isn't an issue of poor housing for asylum seekers, it's an issue of poor housing for the majority of people, particularly our young people. So it's about joining in with the housing campaigns, joining in with the other wider issues opposing austerity and this neoliberal narrative that we've lived under actually since the Thatcher era.
Is it just since the Thatcher? That's another question.
Well, no, but it's become mainstreamed but since the Thatcher era, because pre-Thatcher, the welfare state and its efforts for equality was actually considered the norm. It's now considered highly left-wing, you know. I mean, look at what Corbyn's had to deal with. You know, he really isn't that radical at all, but he's being shifted.
Yeah. The overlay of, latterly we talk about it in terms of asylum, but previously it was migration as a whole. The overlay of that with whatever government expenditure exists is something that's really gone back probably 50 years within the United Kingdom. It's been a facet of just about every general election. And if we just look at the crowing this week over the fact that net migration has fallen by a third, that says something about the pertinence of that debate within politics. Which is why I'm not sure that we can just go back to the Thatcher era with that.
Yeah, I was thinking about particularly neoliberal economic policy. British Futures have done some research on public attitudes, and particularly in relation to migration, and they divide us into sort of three sectors. The 25% of us who advocate for migrant rights and actually have an awareness and an understanding of othering and all the rest of it, and who you know, might well advocate or have some awareness. And then there's also 25% of those very opposed, and those are the racists, I suppose, and the fascists, who perhaps we shouldn't be bothering targeting at all. But there is 50% in the middle who are known as the anxious middle, and they are good people who would stand up for human rights and stand up for us all if they only understood, had the education and understanding to do so. And their fear is, and falling for the narrative and the tabloids and political discourse, etc., is only because they don't understand and because they don't have the experience and they haven't met asylum seekers and migrants, or they don't understand the economic importance of migrants, and they don't understand that austerity has nothing to do with there not being enough money in the public purse, but it is to do with that neoliberal policy where we want the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer.
Isabel?
Yes, so I thought I would come in when you started mentioning the bridging the gap between those groups of people, and you mentioned housing as well. So to introduce the second episode, so after this, so this was done last year, 2016. So throughout this year, 2017, I've been developing the second episode. So still in Middlesbrough, in a very particular neighbourhood. So a neighbourhood where they housed some of the Red Doors. It's a very deprived neighbourhood. It's right bang in the middle of the town. It's called Gresham. And they started demolishing all the houses. So displacing local communities. But this started 10 years ago. Displacing local communities because they had these master plans, megalomanous master plans. And then they halted with the crash, the financial crash, they halted demolition, so it became like almost a ruin. They did nothing. In the meantime, Joe Mast obviously bought the houses, housed the asylum seekers there because it was really cheap, because no one wanted to be there. And now they actually demolishing everything. So, and because of the film, I started being aware of actually there is a disconnect. There isn't understanding between the two groups of people. So I thought, okay, I need to find an excuse of getting these groups together. So how can I do that as an artist? How can I make this happen? So I came up again, relying on a Greek myth, and we've decided to build together a 5-meter tall wooden horse. So we call it the Gresham wooden horse. So throughout this whole summer, we were building it every week at the museum. We're building the horse together. So people were getting the skills of woodworking, and we were just making it happen. And then at the end, when it was finished, on the 24th of September, we did a parade. So we closed the streets down from the museum to the neighborhood, it's like half a mile. So we all accompanied the horse from the museum, and then we celebrated the arrival of the horse in the neighborhood with a massive communal picnic. And then the horse stayed there for a month. But then obviously this brings lots of issues. So it starts bringing, obviously that place is earmarked for regeneration. So there's a council, there's a university, because there is a need for housing. And there is a need, so the whole point was to get the community together and to form some kind of sense of belonging and ownership of the space where they live in, regardless where they come from. If they're there, they have a right to the land. So the horse was almost like a mark, like a symbol that let's take ownership of this together and let's take care of the neighborhoods and initiating conversations through the making of the project. So the horse stayed there for a month, and then there was no place for the horse to be, because from the beginning, and I wasn't aware of this, only towards the end of the month I was made aware that there were bets going from even people that worked in the council, saying how long would the horse last in that neighborhood, and betting from 24 hours to 48 hours to a week. The horse stayed there without one scratch the whole time. No one touched it. But then there was no place for it, because no one wanted to take responsibility, because they also said, oh, it's going to be destroyed, it's going to be burned, vandalized. And then so there was only one outcome, which was to dismantle the horse. So during the dismantling, actually, I could see that people coming in and out whilst we were dismantling, and they were really, really upset, because, oh, we love this horse, we absolutely really took ownership of it. But the good news is, so we dismantled it very carefully, and now it moves on to different stages. So throughout this whole project, it's not just been me and the local people and the refugees, it's been also together, and that's partly due to the museum, to MIME. They also organize there's meetings of different interested parties that want to do projects in that area. So we reunited once a month, roughly. And there's lots of different projects. One is an eco-village, a proposal for building an eco-village, where the people that will build it will have the right to either rent or own the property. There's refurbishing of properties by refugees or asylum seekers or local community members to get the skills. So get the skills in whatever, plastering, plumbing, whatever it's needed. And there's also, we found out there's land where we could do an allotment. And then I discovered recently that in 1895, that precise plot of land used to be the community allotment. So what we did was unpack everything, dismantle the horse, it's saved, now in storage, and comes the spring, we'll carry on the project, but just in a different format. So we'll start making the community allotment again. And hopefully one of the properties that's going to be renovated, it's very close proximity, they'll start doing the catering enterprise, the community kitchen. Because the university is going to have a student village in that area, but in order to integrate with the community needs to take, again, some ownership and have something to gain from it, rather than having something imposed onto them. So why not provide those services within the student village? Why not have the community kitchen that needs to, the builders will be there, they need to be fed. And even after that, students will be there, they need to be fed. So, and even the local community. So the project keeps snowballing into all of these things. So, and you're absolutely right, it's getting people together to start initiating those conversations. And even art, I think, has got that power, which is even to bring divergent charities and communities and support groups that do not interact with each other within the same place. Because these cater for the refugees and asylum seekers, but they don't cater for the local population or for the Polish or for... So I think it's got that power to do that, to bring people together. And it's just, yeah.
So what you're describing there is art as a catalyst.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Art as a lesson provider.
Yes,
So-
it's a catalyst. It's an excuse to kind of activate something. It's not the end-all, be-all. It is very important to to put things across and to pass a message. But as you were saying, how do we take this further? How do we actually have some action, some impact? And I do agree, because that's also how always I face myself, and I always ask that question to myself, is as an artist, I've got no power. The only power I have is to do the work that I do and keep persisting on it. And I do try my best. I try to distribute films to MPs and try to have conversations with people, but that goes so far. So that brings us back again to the local.
Yeah.
Because if we start changing our local environment, that doesn't seem much, but it's not just me. Like me, there's all of us probably, and lots of other artists that are doing that within their own communities. And the more we do it, these networks expand. So let's start from the bottom up then.
That's quite a radical way of thinking about the problem, I think, isn't it? That it should be from the bottom up. But somehow or other we don't seem to be able to develop that unless we can develop some sort of critical mass. It doesn't change policy. So I understand that completely. It's a kind of a level at which you can work as an artist. You can't change government policy, but you can work to build a sense of community and relationship amongst, you know, all kinds of people in the small pocket that you're in. But that's a big radical development across the country. If you were to hope that would start to have a, you know, I suppose we can take, we can sort of think about the way that Corbyn has built a very big political support and party membership, and none of us thought that would ever be possible, and yet that sort of largest party in Europe and a critical mass. But we don't have any experience of that. What we have is the hierarchy of society, and getting worse, I think, in terms of the elites you were talking about. And that difficulty about how do the people at this grassroots level, if you like, become empowered, be it beyond a certain... At some point, something bigger has to change in terms of thinking. And I know Tony Benn used to say we must be aware of apathy and cynicism, you know, the thing. So I've tried to always avoid that, but you're always kind of feeling that a sort of element of this is worth it, yes, because of all the relationships we built, but still with the horror of benevolence, as you were saying, somehow or other that doesn't change. It, you know, it changes amongst us, and that's good, but it doesn't seem to change the political systems in the way that we'd like, and the way that power is used, I suppose. Sorry.
Before I misunderstood, and I want to apologise, I took your example wrongly, I should have listened better. That all the work done and all these initiatives which is happening, that charities in itself is of course brilliant. That I just want, it's just that I was trying to observe a mechanism that as long as we can be very aware of that might help us forward to not fall in a trap, which I think is it's that how to make proper connections. And I heard things here, and also thinking you elaborated. I think that is kind of what matters. But there is things. It's also thinking how British society work, and maybe how some other European societies work, and taking things there, because it's where there is for me sometimes hope, but also despair in these times.
Okay.
Yeah, just quickly to sort of come back on that, because it's not like it's never going to be a quick solution, is it? And I think what you're doing is great, because it's like you never know where that's going to go. You never know who you've touched, not you, but you know, like everybody who's been in that project. Who are they going to be in the future? You know, it could be a refugee from Eritrea who ends up becoming a lawyer or a politician or whatever. You know, you don't know. You can only. I think starting from the grassroots is a great place to start. And I
It
think,
may be the only place we
and I
can
think it's
Can I
not going to
just-
change quickly.
Say something.
But you
You're
don't know
saying
where
is
it'll go.
radical, but it is happening. So I know also through my research lots of artists, and I live in Sheffield. I actually work in Leicester, and in Sheffield there's a whole vibrant grassroots world of activities where people pay as much as you can. They do soup kitchens to fundraise for asylum seekers, and artists come in. There's poetry events, and they happen every week. And they're self-sustaining, they're self-organized. The connection with the government, how you put pressure, that is not happening yet. But I think it will get there because that critical mass you are talking, it's going to be visible.
Yeah.
Because the austerity, you can't cope. You know, people, even the middle classes, are being. You know, something is going to happen. I don't know what is going to happen, but I want.
Yeah, maybe I'm being cynical, but I'm not happy about that. But Colleen, go on. I'll tell
I was
you
just
why.
going to say, City of Sanctuary have a sort of theory of change, because obviously we need change, and that is, and it partly involves the idea of people connecting, and we also have a passionate belief in grassroots action, you know, rather than top down, although strategically, you know, in the National City of Sanctuary I might work with the Association of Chief Librarians to get them to all want to be libraries of sanctuary and to talk to their staff and, you know, create resources so that libraries can be more welcoming even than they are now. And then once libraries of sanctuary become known as such in their communities, you know, so it might trigger more grassroots action and more. But in essence, we believe in the grassroots, and we believe that grassroots swell is growing, and it will become a critical mass, where it will become a moral imperative. You know, where politicians who can say, "Oh, I've heard from that Colleen Molloy for the 10th time this year about some asylum seeker, but now I'm getting dozens of letters every week." You know, and it becomes, and eventually, you know. The powers that be, the real elite, the corporations, the very rich are not going to change. They are not going to give up. You know, they're not going to say, yes, you were right after all. And I don't know whether they might even clamp down on the politicians who say, yes, we do think you're right, and we think things should change, and it is about more school places, not about less migrants, and so on. I'm going to ramble a bit, so sorry. But I think the main point is that, you know, there is, you know, it's possible, but it is one relationship at a time, one connection at a time, one project at a time.
Okay. So no, I'm going to stop. It's not my place to respond.
No, please
No,
do. We
no.
want to hear now.
And unfortunately, we have just run out of time.
Perhaps we can hear
Vanessa.
what you think in your summary of...
Yeah, maybe. We'll try. Go ahead.
Just to echo what the lady was saying, I think the whole thing about grassroots is that grass will grow everywhere and anywhere, and it doesn't necessarily have to take a particular group of people at a given time. It happens when it's supposed to happen, and we're from a country, from the United Kingdom, where in the past people's education has been limited. It's only when people have actually sought to find out about a different way of looking at something or doing something that you get change. Because if that hadn't been the case, a lot of the so-called Labour MPs of the past would never got through the doors of the House of Commons or into the Lords. Not to say that that's the best place for them, maybe that's where they're supposed to be, but ultimately change comes because people get fed up to an extent with what is in front of them, and they want to see a difference. And it doesn't matter, I think, ultimately how rich the rich become and carry on being, at some point even they will fall to change. There'll be no choice.
Thank you for that message of hope.
Yeah.
And the grassroots network is massive now.
Yes.
It's huge, isn't it, Colleen? It's you know,
Yes, it
across
is.
Europe, across the whole world.
Yeah.
It's
And maybe
really massive, and Facebook and things like that have made it
Yeah.
easier.
And maybe if we had more time, then we can explore why is there that grassroots network is massive. And my experience is that there has always been massive work done at grassroots on a whole range of things, which has rarely connected with the top level politics. and brought about political change, or meaningful political change. It's brought about at times a token support for humanity, for human rights, for democracy, but rarely put it into practice in a real way that's sustainable. And I think part of what we're seeing with the asylum seeker debate and with migration debates is, in part, what Colleen was saying. It's the austerity. It's the cipher for austerity mechanisms, but it's also a cipher for commodification of people. And I don't see much that we do on the grassroots changing the way national politics seeks to commodify us and our service as much as possible. And that's a hopeless message to end on. I'm so sorry. but I prefer the message we had earlier. It forced me to thank everybody who's organised this evening. Ambrose, especially for initiating the idea of the festival 4 years ago, for persevering with making sure the festival happens every year, and for seeing it grow year on year. So thank you very much, Ambrose. Thank you very much to the panel members, Colleen, Isabel and Maria. And thank you all very much for being here, for watching the film, and for your brilliant contributions.
Thank you for my seat.
and also, especially, I would like to say thank you to Maria for taking care of the film component of the festival. In previous years, we have not been able to have a film component until we had a conversation with Maria, and from now I think we will have a permanent film component. So thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
And thank you to Chino. Chino, thank you.
Anyone we haven't thanked?
Sound?
Yes, thank you, Sam.
Funny, for sound.
Thank you for Emma for coming and taking notes.
Are you writing up the minutes?
Wow.